Why must you watch your thoughts? Not because thinking wrong is a sin, not because the universe is out to punish you, but because every single thought is a broadcast, and every broadcast silently participates in the reality you will live tomorrow. What few people realize is that the universe doesn't react to the occasional wish, it responds to the pattern you sustain. Carl Jung called these unconscious contents in action. Jordan Peterson speaks of responsibility for what you feed internally. Carl Rogers pointed to the coherence between inner experience and reality. Alan Watts exposed the illusory game of control, and Helio Couto connects it all to the field that answers to your vibration. Today, they all step into the same train car to answer one single question. What happens when you stop fighting your thoughts and start caring for what you emit? Why must you watch your thoughts? Not because it is a sin, but because it is a radio broadcast that creates tomorrow. There is a silent and almost invisible belief that crosses cultures, religions, and scientific systems. The belief that thinking is a neutral, harmless, and private act, as if thought were merely internal noise with no real impact on the world. But this idea does not hold up when we observe reality with more attention. Thinking is not a passive act. Thinking is broadcasting. Every thought carries a frequency, a signature, and an internal organization that projects itself beyond the mind. Thought does not remain confined inside your head. It behaves like a continuous signal, similar to a radio station that never shuts down, transmitting day and night even when you believe you are in silence. If you observe your own experience, you will realize that your life does not respond merely to what you consciously desire, but primarily to the pattern you sustain mentally. Two people might desire the same thing, speak the same words, and repeat the same affirmations, yet obtain completely different results. This happens because the verbalized desire is only a fraction of the equation. What truly organizes the field of experience is the continuous broadcast that happens between one desire and another. It lives in the intervals, in the automatic thoughts, and in the silent interpretations you make about yourself, about the world, and about what you believe is possible. Before we advance, it is important that you understand something fundamental about this space where we are together. This channel is not a collection of isolated videos, it is a journey. Imagine that we are traveling on a train. At each station, a new landscape is revealed. At some stops, new passengers board. At others, ideas are deepened, revisited, and reorganized. You do not need to have watched all previous stations to be here, but each one of them adds a layer of understanding to the path. In this specific train car, 5 minds are already traveling with us. At first glance, they might seem like unlikely travel companions. Helio Couto, Carl Rogers, Carl Jung, Jordan Peterson, and Alan Watts. They are not here to compete with one another, nor to prove who is right or wrong. They are here because each one, using their own language, touched upon the same central point, the deep relationship between consciousness, thought, and reality. Each one observed this phenomenon from a different angle, but all pointed in the same direction. The way you organize your mind inevitably organizes your experience of life. This train car is not a debate, it is a composition. Helio Couto helps us understand thought as an energetic field and coherence. Carl Rogers brings the dimension of internal congruence and authenticity as organizing factors of experience. Carl Jung reveals the role of the unconscious and the symbols that operate below the rational level. Jordan Peterson exposes how internal narratives structure behavior, responsibility, and destiny. Alan Watts dissolves the rigidity of the separate self and reminds us that the observer is not outside the system he observes. None of them cancels the other out. On the contrary, together they form a broader and more honest map of the human condition. If you have just arrived, do not worry. There is no need to choose a side, an author, or a belief. The invitation here is different. It is to observe patterns. It is to notice how similar ideas emerge in different contexts when someone looks deeply at the same question. What, after all, creates the reality we experience every day? As we saw at the previous station of this journey, many people have learned to let go of the desire. They learn to make requests to the universe, to visualize goals, and to declare intentions. In theory, the process seems simple. You desire, you let go, and you trust. However, most people stop exactly there and fail to notice the subtle error they commit right after. They let go of the desire for a few minutes, perhaps for a few seconds, and spend the rest of the day broadcasting the opposite. They ask for abundance but broadcast scarcity in small decisions. They ask for health but broadcast fear when interpreting every signal from the body. They ask for more harmonious relationships but broadcast mistrust, expectation of rejection, and constant defense. The desire was made. But the daily broadcast cancels the request before any deeper reorganization can occur, not as punishment, not as a moral failure, but due to signal incoherence. Reality does not respond to what you would like to be true, it responds to the most stable pattern you sustain. That is why watching your thoughts is not an act of repression, nor of guilt. It is an act of internal engineering. It is understanding that every recurring thought reinforces a frequency, and every frequency tends to materialize as experience, not magically in a fantasy sense, but consistently in a systemic sense. When you begin to see thought as a broadcast, something changes deeply. You stop trying to control the external world and start observing the internal field with more responsibility. Not to eliminate negative thoughts by force, but to understand where they come from, what they feed, and which stories they are sustaining. This is the point where this train car begins to gain speed. Because from here on, we are no longer talking about isolated desires, but about identity, narrative, and coherence. In the next chapter, we will deepen exactly this. The difference between a passing thought and a pattern of continuous broadcast, and why the mind, when unobserved, tends to repeat old stories even when you believe you are choosing something new. When we observe more closely what goes on inside the human mind, we realize that there is a point where romanticized spirituality fails. The idea that it is enough to think positively, ignore the negative, and everything will resolve itself. It is exactly here that Jordan Peterson enters this train car with a message that disturbs but organizes. For him, internal chaos is not something abstract. It is a real territory, alive, demanding responsibility. Thinking maliciously is not just having an unpleasant thought that passes and goes away. Thinking maliciously repeatedly is feeding a structure. It is cultivating a monster that grows in the absence of vigilance. Peterson does not speak this in a moralistic tone. He speaks in a structural tone. The human mind, when it does not assume responsibility for its own content, tends to organize itself around resentment, victimization, and denial. These patterns do not emerge from nowhere. They emerge when a person avoids looking at their own chaos, when they prefer to blame the world, circumstances, the past, or others, instead of recognizing that there is something inside asking for order. Responsibility, in this context, is not an unfair weight. It is the only way for chaos to stop silently governing decisions. Assuming responsibility for your own thought is admitting that what you tolerate inside yourself inevitably becomes part of your destiny. Recurrent thoughts of devaluation, contained anger, constant fear, or cynicism are not neutral. They shape attitudes, choices, and reactions. Gradually, they begin to guide behavior as if they were absolute truths. The problem is not having these thoughts. The problem is pretending they do not exist. Or worse, treating them as something harmless with no consequence whatsoever. It is here that Jung leans into the conversation and adds an essential layer to this understanding. Jung agrees with Peterson about the need for responsibility, but he deepens the origin of these thoughts. For Jung, what we call negative thinking, strange impulses, or uncomfortable emotions does not arise merely from the conscious surface. They emerge from the shadow. The shadow is the set of aspects of the psyche that were repressed, denied, or considered unacceptable throughout life. Everything that did not fit into the image we built of who we think we are. Ignoring the shadow does not eliminate it. On the contrary, it strengthens it. The less consciousness you have about these contents, the more they operate autonomously. Jung warned that what does not become conscious returns as destiny. And here the word destiny does not have an exaggerated mystical tone. It points to the fact that unconscious patterns tend to repeat until they are recognized. The ignored negative thought does not disappear. It reorganizes itself. It finds indirect roots. It manifests in sabotage, in emotional outbursts, in incoherent choices, and in recurring conflicts. When someone tries to merely replace negative thoughts with positive ones without integrating the shadow, they create an internal split. One part of the mind feigns light, while another part accumulates darkness. This division generates tension, and tension, sooner or later, finds an escape valve. That is why so many people who claim to be spiritually evolved still live in internal conflict. They tried to transcend something that was never integrated. Peterson would call this dangerous naivety. Jung would call it inflation of the ego. In both cases, the result is the same. An individual disconnected from fundamental parts of themselves, vulnerable to patterns they do not understand and do not control. Responsibility, then, is not just assuming what you do in the external world. It is assuming what you harbor in the internal world. It is recognizing that hostile, envious, fearful, or self-deprecating thoughts are part of the human psyche and need to be seen, understood, and organized. There is a point of maturity where a person realizes they are not good despite their shadow, but because they learned to deal with it. True integration does not eliminate internal destructive potential. It recognizes it, delimits it, and transforms it into conscious strength. Jung said that no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And Peterson reinforces that only those who know their capacity for destruction can choose responsibly, not to exercise it. When these two thoughts meet, something powerful emerges. Negative thoughts are not enemies to be exterminated, nor guests to be ignored. They are signals. They are messages from parts of the psyche asking for attention. When you do not look at them, they organize themselves alone. And what grows in the darkness usually does not have a commitment to your well-being. In this train car, we begin to understand that watching thought is not censoring it, but illuminating it. It is not fighting against it, but assuming responsibility for its existence and its impact. The human mind needs order, not denial. And that order begins when you accept that what is not seen becomes dominant. If you have ever felt that your thoughts seem to have a life of their own, as if they operated outside your conscious control, leave your like to mark this understanding and let us move together to the next level of this journey. After traversing the landscape of responsibility and the shadow, an inevitable paradox emerges. If negative thoughts must not be ignored but also cannot be fought by force, what exactly do we do with them? It is here that many people lose their way. Upon realizing the impact of thought on the creation of reality, they try to assume absolute control of the mind. They monitor every idea, censor every emotion, and police every internal impulse. The result is rarely freedom. Most of the time, it is tension, exhaustion, and a silent increase in internal conflict. There is a subtle trap in the idea of control. The more you try to dominate the mind by force, the more it reacts. Not because it is rebellious, but because excessive effort generates resistance. Thought does not function like a muscle that obeys direct commands. It behaves like a field, and fields respond to pressure with turbulence. It is at this point that Alan Watts enters this train car with his characteristic lucidity and dismantles the logic of direct effort. Watts explained that trying not to think of something is, in itself, a form of thinking about it. The internal command already carries the image of what one wishes to avoid. The mind does not understand negations in the way we would like. When you tell yourself that you must not feel fear, fear is already present as a reference. When you try to eliminate a thought, you keep it active in the field of attention. This is called the law of reverse effort. The more you try to force a mental state, the more distant it becomes. Watts used simple metaphors to reveal profound truths. One of them is the attempt to smooth turbulent water with a flat iron. The more force you apply, the more waves you create. The water does not calm down by imposition. It calms down when the interference ceases. The same happens with the mind. The attempt at rigid control intensifies what is intended to be suppressed. Not because the mind is an enemy, but because the effort creates friction. This understanding dismantles the idea of internal war. If fighting against thought strengthens it, insisting on combat only amplifies the problem. Many people enter this cycle without noticing. They try to control the mind to improve their lives, but end up trapped in a tense and constant vigilance. Thought ceases to be observed and begins to be patrolled, and everything that is patrolled goes into hiding. The shadow, in this scenario, is not integrated. It adapts and finds new ways to operate. It is here that Carl Rogers softens the atmosphere of the train car and offers an unexpected exit. Rogers did not speak of control nor of repression. He spoke of acceptance, not in the sense of passive resignation, but of full recognition of what is present. For Rogers, genuine change occurs when a person allows themselves to be exactly what they are in that moment. Paradoxically, it is this acceptance that opens space for transformation. Rogers observed throughout his clinical practice that people change not when they are pressured to change, but when they feel deeply understood and accepted. This includes accepting uncomfortable thoughts, contradictory emotions, and confused internal states. When the mind ceases to be a battlefield, it begins to reorganize itself naturally. Acceptance dissolves resistance, and where there is no resistance, the flow adjusts itself. This approach does not contradict the responsibility presented earlier, it complements it. Assuming responsibility is not controlling by force. It is being present with what arises, without denying, without dramatizing, and without feeding. It is recognizing thought as a transient event, not as a fixed identity. Rogers reminds us that the mind heals in the space of safety, not in the environment of constant threat. When Alan Watts and Carl Rogers meet, an elegant understanding emerges. Thought does not need to be conquered, it needs to be seen. The effort to eliminate unwanted thoughts keeps them alive. Conscious acceptance, on the other hand, allows them to fulfill their cycle and dissolve, not by magic, but because they do not find enough resistance to latch onto. This is the paradox of control. The more you try to dominate the mind, the more it fragments. The more you allow it to reveal itself without judgment, the more it organizes itself. This does not mean abandoning discernment or responsibility. It means changing the posture. Instead of a general at war, you become an attentive observer. And the observer, as we will see ahead, is not neutral. He alters the field simply by the way he observes. But if we cannot fight against thought, how do we change the broadcast that creates reality? The answer lies not in morality, nor in willpower. It lies in the physics of the field and the role of the observer, and that is exactly what we will begin to explore in the next chapter. At this point in the journey, the train enters a region where words begin to yield space to principles. Here, the quantum architect takes the helm, not to contradict what has been said so far, but to organize everything under a single logic, the logic of field physics. The vision presented by Helio Couto helps us understand something essential. The universe does not respond to declared intention, nor to spoken language, nor to the narrative we tell ourselves. It responds to the dominant frequency we are broadcasting continuously. The universe does not understand Portuguese, English, or any other human language. It does not process requests in the way we are accustomed to imagining. It responds to the energetic organization of the system. Thoughts, emotions, and internal states are not merely psychological events. They are electromagnetic patterns. Every recurring thought generates a signature. Every sustained emotional state creates a resonance. When these frequencies repeat, they form what physics calls a standing wave. A standing wave does not move through space. It keeps vibrating in the same pattern. This is exactly what happens when someone lives trapped in the same internal state for long periods. The person does not advance, not because the universe blocks them, but because the broadcast does not change. The field responds with coherence to the signal it receives. There is no judgment, no reward, and no punishment. There is only resonance. Helio Couto describes this phenomenon as harmonic resonance. The larger system tends to amplify what is coherent with itself. When thought, emotion, and identity are aligned, the field responds fluidly. When they are misaligned, interferences arise. And here we enter a point that connects directly with the previous station of this journey. In the last video we spoke about letting go of the desire, visualizing the present as if it were already happening. By doing this, you create a wave, an initial organization in the field. The problem is not in the visualization. The problem arises right after, when fear enters the scene. Fear is not just an unpleasant emotion, it is a frequency. And when this frequency remains active, it interferes with the wave created by the visualization. In physics, when two waves meet, they can add up or cancel each other out. If they are in phase, constructive interference occurs. The amplitude increases. If they are out of phase, destructive interference occurs. The wave weakens or collapses. What many people do, without realizing it, is create a wave of desire and immediately broadcast an opposite wave of fear, doubt, or insecurity. The result is not that the desire fails. The result is that destructive interference neutralizes the signal. This dynamic is not symbolic, it is structural. The recurring thought creates a stable electromagnetic pattern. The sustained emotion gives energy to this pattern. The identity, what you believe yourself to be, fixes the frequency and time. When these three elements are aligned, the field responds. When they are misaligned, the system enters into noise. That is why it is useless to merely think positively for a few minutes. It is useless to visualize and then return to the habitual state of fear. The field responds to the most consistent pattern, not to the isolated event. The electromagnetic signature you broadcast throughout the day is the true command, not what you desire in a moment of inspiration, but what you sustain in the silent routine of automatic thoughts. Here, the role of the quantum architect becomes clear. It is not about moralizing thoughts, nor fighting against emotions, nor blaming yourself for feeling fear. It is about understanding the mechanics. When you understand that you are broadcasting a frequency, you gain the possibility of reorganizing it, not by force, as we saw previously, but by coherence. Coherence is the state where thought, emotion, and identity point in the same direction. When this occurs, the field enters into resonance. Reality begins to reorganize itself in a way that, from an external point of view, looks like coincidence, luck, or a miracle. From the system's point of view, it is just physics applied to a complex field. This is the foundation of everything we teach here. If you want to master this mechanics, understand how to align your broadcast, and cross the next stations of this journey with more clarity, Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next chapters. After understanding the mechanics of broadcasting, resonance, and the paradox of control, a practical question naturally arises. What to do at the exact moment when the thought of doubt appears? Because it will appear. Not as a failure of the process, but as part of the functioning of the human mind. The difference between those who remain trapped in a pattern and those who transform it does not lie in never having thoughts of scarcity or fear, but in knowing exactly what to do when they arise. Here enters the tool of pattern interruption. It is not born from struggle, nor from repression, nor from the attempt to replace one thought with another by force. It is born from the understanding that thought is a flow of energy, and every flow only continues to exist as long as it receives feeding. If you cut the feeding, the pattern loses strength. Simple, direct, functional. When a thought of doubt appears, something like this will not work. I have tried before, or this is not for me. The first impulse of many people is to fight with the mind. They try to argue internally, convince, justify, or rebut. Others fall into guilt, thinking they failed spiritually for thinking that. Both reactions feed the pattern because attention is energy, emotion is energy, engagement is energy. The technique begins exactly where these reactions end. When the thought arises, you do not fight with it. Do not overanalyze it. Do not turn it into internal drama. You merely recognize its presence. Recognizing is not agreeing. Recognizing is noticing that something passed through the field of the mind, just as a cloud crosses the sky. In that instant, you apply the simple and direct mental command. Cancel, cancel. It is not a magic phrase. It is an interruption command. It is like pressing a power off button. By saying this internally, you are not expelling the thought. You are withdrawing energy from it. You are telling the system that this flow will no longer be fed. Imagine an appliance plugged into a socket. While the plug is connected, the current flows. The appliance works. When you pull the plug, you do not need to break the appliance, nor curse the socket, nor argue with the electricity. The flow simply ceases. Thought functions in the same way. It only sustains itself while receiving energy from attention, emotion, and repetition. The command cancel functions as this cut. It does not demand emotional effort. It does not demand exaggerated faith. It demands only conscious decision. By repeating it twice, you reinforce the command in the attentional field, not to create tension, but to clearly mark the closing of that cycle. And here exists a crucial point. The interruption cannot leave a prolonged void, because the mental field tends to fill spaces. Therefore, immediately after cancelling the thought, you insert the image or the sensation of the wish already fulfilled, not as future hope, but as present state. The image does not need to be detailed. It can be a bodily sensation, a relief, an expansion, a tranquility. The important thing is that it carries the frequency of the result, not the anxiety of waiting. This step is fundamental because it redirects the flow. You do not merely cut the energy of the old pattern, you offer the system a new path of organization. The mind needs direction. When you cancel a thought and do not insert anything in its place, it tends to return to the previous habit. When you cancel and immediately anchor the sensation of the fulfilled desire, you reinforce the new wave. This process respects everything we have seen so far. It does not fight with the mind, as Alan Watts warned. It does not generate guilt or judgment, as Carl Rogers taught. It does not ignore the shadow, but neither does it feed it. It merely organizes the flow. It is simple engineering applied to the internal field. In the beginning, it will be necessary to repeat this process several times a day, not because you are doing it wrong, but because old patterns are well-established standing waves. They do not dissolve with a single command. They weaken through the absence of continuous feeding. Every time you cancel and redirect, the pattern loses density. Over time, thoughts arise with less strength, less frequency, and less emotional charge. There is something deeply liberating at this point. You realize you do not need to control the mind all the time. You just need to know what to do when it tries to return to the old path. You are not a hostage of thought. You are the operator of the flow. This technique is not a mystical ritual. It is an adjustment of internal posture. It is assuming the place of the observer who interferes in the field by the conscious choice of where to place their energy. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes. And the more natural it becomes, the more coherent your broadcast is. In the next chapter, we will gather all the passengers of this train car. Each mentor will contribute their final piece to show how responsibility, shadow, acceptance, resonance, and practice integrate into a single movement of continuous consciousness. We now arrive at the moment of convergence. Throughout this journey, different voices have occupied this train car, each pointing to a specific aspect of the human mind. It might seem that Jordan Peterson's discipline conflicts with Alan Watts's fluidity, or that Carl Jung's depth is distant from the simplicity of the practical technique we just learned. But when we look through the eyes of the quantum architect, we perceive that everyone is saying exactly the same thing. The technique of interrupting the pattern and redirecting the focus is the meeting point of all these perspectives. When you apply the cancel command to a thought of defeat, you are doing exactly what Jordan Peterson suggests. You are assuming responsibility for the hierarchy of values in your mind. You are establishing order in the face of chaos. Peterson teaches that if you do not choose what to aim at, your internal monsters will choose for you. Interrupting a negative thought is an act of sovereignty. It is deciding that you will not allow resentment or fear to govern your internal house. It is the practical application of the antidote to chaos. Simultaneously, you are fulfilling what Carl Jung proposed as the path to individuation. By noticing the negative thought before it takes over, you are bringing the unconscious to the light of consciousness. You are stopping the shadow from operating autonomously and transforming into destiny. Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The practice of observing and cancelling is exactly this process of bringing light to the mechanism, preventing the old pattern from operating in the shadows. However, doing this with tension would ruin the process. That is why Alan Watts is essential in this circle. He reminds us that this interruption is not a war, it is a dance. When you say cancel, you are not fighting against reality. You are just stepping out of a game you no longer wish to play. Watts saw life as music, as flux. Sticking to a repetitive thought of suffering is like getting stuck on a broken record. Cancelling and redirecting is simply nudging the needle so the music can continue. It is an act of lightness, not of heaviness. And to ensure this does not become a cold mechanical act, Carl Rogers brings the necessary humanity. The redirection works because it seeks congruence. Rogers taught that suffering arises from the distance between who we are and what we experience. When you cancel a thought that diminishes you and replace it with the sensation of the wish fulfilled, you are aligning your internal experience with your true potential. You are reducing the distance between the self and the reality you wish to live. It is an act of self-acceptance, not of self-rejection. Finally, Helio Couto and the physics of the field sealed this union. All these movements, responsibility, consciousness, lightness, and congruence result in a single physical effect, vibrational coherence. The universe does not judge which philosopher you prefer, it reads the signal you emit. When all these parts of you agree to stop feeding the noise and start feeding the signal of the realized wish, the standing wave changes, the interference ceases, the message becomes clear. In this train car, there are no divergent voices. There are complementary layers of a single truth. You are the operator of the system, you define the order, you illuminate the shadow, you dance with the flux, you align the experience, and you emit the signal. The technique is simple, but what it moves is profound. It is the integration of the human being assuming their role as a conscious co-creator. As we move toward the conclusion of this journey, I would like to know which of these voices speaks loudest to your heart today. Is it Peterson's discipline, Watts's lightness, Jung's depth, or Rogers's acceptance? Tell me in the comments. Your answer helps us understand who is traveling with us in this train car. After integrating the voices that traverse this train car, the most challenging understanding of all emerges. The secret was never to do it once. The secret is to sustain. Sustain the frequency. Sustain the internal posture. Sustain the broadcast even when the external world has not yet reorganized its forms. Most people can access a good state for a few minutes. They visualize. They feel. They get excited. The problem begins when visible reality does not immediately follow this internal change. It is in this interval that old patterns try to regain control. In the previous video, we worked on the exercise of receiving the gift, not as naive imagination, but as a concrete internal state, the sensation of having already received, of already being in possession, of already being in coherence with what was chosen. This state is not euphoria, it is not anxiety, it is a specific type of confident tranquility, a sensation of internal settling, like someone who knows something is already resolved, even if it is not yet visible. Sustaining this state is the true training, because the external world does not reorganize instantly. It responds with a delay. There is a natural time lag between the change of frequency and the perceptible manifestation. In this interval, the environment usually tests the old pattern. Situations similar to before reappear. People repeat behaviors. Circumstances seem to confirm the old narrative, not because the new is not working, but because the system is still adjusting. It is here that many give up. They interpret the immediate absence of results as proof of failure. They return to fear, doubt, and scarcity. and by doing so they interrupt the wave they were sustaining, not for lack of merit but for loss of coherence. Sustaining the frequency means remaining in the state of having already received even when external evidence suggests otherwise, not by denial of reality, but by understanding the process. The state of having already received does not depend on what happens outside. It depends on your internal position regarding what happens outside. It is a fine adjustment, a silent choice. You observe the world, but do not let yourself be defined by it. You act when you need to act, but you do not negotiate your internal frequency with every external stimulus. At this point, the cancel command gains its noblest function. It does not serve only to cut isolated negative thoughts. It serves to protect the state of grace. Whenever something external tries to pull your attention back to the old pattern, the cancellation prevents this interference from becoming dominant. It is not an aggressive gesture. It is a protective gesture. You are preserving the coherence of the field you began to build. Sustaining does not mean making an effort all the time. It means returning quickly to the chosen state whenever you perceive a deviation. There is no perfection in this process. There will be moments of oscillation, old thoughts will arise, habitual emotions will try to impose themselves. The difference now is that you know what is happening, and you know what to do. Recognize, cancel, return to the sensation of already being aligned. This constant return is what stabilizes the frequency. Just as an old standing wave was built by repetition, the new one is also established by constancy, not by emotional intensity, but by quiet persistence. Gradually, the state of having already received ceases to be an exercise and becomes the background of the experience. Thought changes. Emotion adjusts. Identity begins to reorganize around this new base. When this happens, something curious emerges. The external world begins to respond in an almost discrete way. Small synchronicities appear. Situations rearrange themselves. People react differently, not as a spectacle, but as a natural consequence of internal change. The field responds to what is stable, not to what is episodic. Sustaining the frequency is, deep down, sustaining a new relationship with time. You stop demanding immediate proofs and start trusting the coherence of the process, not because you believe blindly, but because you understand the mechanics. The physics of the field does not work with haste. It works with consistency. This chapter exists to remind you that the real work happens after the exercise, not during it. The exercise opens the door. Sustaining keeps the house in order. And it is exactly here that everything we have seen begins to consolidate into something greater than technique, greater than concept. In the next and final chapter, we will tie this whole journey together. The farewell from the train car will not be an end, but a synthesis. The point where science, consciousness, and practice meet so that you move forward without depending on this train anymore, but carrying with you the capacity to drive your own field. We have reached the end of today's journey, but not the end of the path. The train slows down for a few moments, the doors open, some passengers observe the landscape and move forward with something new inside themselves. The track remains. The movement continues. Everything shared here exists not to be kept as theory, but to be lived as an internal posture. What transforms is not the momentary understanding, it is the silent embodiment in daily life. Throughout this journey, we traversed a subtle yet profound shift in perspective. We moved away from the idea that thought needs to be perfect and entered the understanding that thought needs to be coherent. This distinction changes everything. Most people lose themselves trying to police every thought, as if the universe were a judge attentive to any mental slip. This generates tension, guilt, and exhaustion. But that was never the requirement of the field. The universe does not demand perfection in thoughts. It demands coherence in the predominant intention. It does not matter if old thoughts arise occasionally. What matters is which frequency you sustain as a base, which state returns more isolated, which narrative occupies the center of your identity. The broadcast that creates reality is not made of exceptions, but of patterns. When you understand this, something relaxes inside. You stop punishing yourself for passing thoughts. You stop measuring your value by what spontaneously arises in the mind. You start observing with more maturity. You recognize, interrupt when necessary, redirect, and carry on. There is no drama. There is no war. There is quiet responsibility. Trust, here, is not blind optimism. It is trust in the mechanics. It is knowing that the field responds to what is sustained, not to what is sporadic. It is understanding that reality reorganizes itself based on stable internal states, not isolated emotional peaks. Trust is continuing to broadcast even when the world is still in transit. It is remaining coherent while the external form adjusts. This posture changes the relationship with time. You stop expecting immediate results as proof of value. You stop interpreting delays as failure. You start seeing the process as a continuous frequency adjustment. Anxiety decreases because the need for external confirmation loses strength. Internal coherence becomes the new north. The interruption command, the cancel, is not an eternal crutch. It is a transition tool. It exists to protect the state you have chosen until that state becomes natural. Over time, the frequency stabilizes, thought changes, emotion follows, identity reorganizes, and the command begins to be used less and less, not because you became perfect, but because the old pattern lost strength. Throughout this trip, the passengers of this train car offered different maps for the same crossing: responsibility, shadow integration, acceptance, resonance, conscious practice. Everything converges to a simple point. You are not here to fight against yourself. You are here to align with yourself. Coherence does not demand rigidity, it demands presence. As the train moves on, a subtle notice remains for the next station. There is an element we have not yet explored in depth. Emotion, not as an impulsive reaction, but as a calibrator of the speed of manifestation. Thought creates direction. Emotion adjusts intensity. It is what accelerates or decelerates the process. It is what gives weight to the wave. This will be the next deepening, because understanding emotion changes the relationship with everything that was set up to here. For now, allow this content to settle. Observe your thoughts in the coming days, not with tense vigilance, but with serene curiosity. Use the tools when necessary. Return to the chosen state whenever you perceive a deviation. Sustain. Trust the process. The train keeps moving, even when you are not looking out the window. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. If this content made sense to you, subscribe to the channel. Activate the bell so you do not miss the next stations, and follow us on this journey of consciousness, science, and living practice. Here, we continue in motion. Here, we continue as architects of our own field.